Hello everyone, welcome back to Nightmare's Edge. This evening, I have a different kind of story. Different in that it was a story written by me. It is my first, but I do hope you enjoy it. And before we get started, I would like to give a huge shout out to Furberries, Creepy Clown Girl, and Wrath of Blades for lending me their voices. They did amazing. Their information will be listed in the description. Go check them out, sub to their channels, love their stuff. That being said, I had a lot of fun putting this together, so again, I hope you guys enjoy it. Now sit back, relax, and let me tickle those inner fears. I woke up to find myself in a haze that I could not quite shake. I had clearly been here a while as my muscles started to cramp when I tried to shift my body. Further proof was that I could feel how tight my skin was from laying in the blazing sun. I laid there for a bit, hoping that the haze would pass, but after no luck, I decided to open my eyes. That was a horrible mistake. Immediately, the sun felt as though it were trying to fry my eyes. I snapped them shut and dropped my head back to the ground. The moment my head came in contact, I became aware of this pain in my head that was so intense, I was certain my skull was split open. I gently ran my fingers over my scalp, trying to understand how bad it was, when I felt my cold matted hair that seemed to flake when I rubbed it between my fingers. Somehow, I knew immediately it was dried blood. With that realization, the haze started to clear a bit and I began to try to focus on smaller things. I could feel grass under my fingertips, I could hear babbling water, like a creek was nearby, and the chirps of many birds. This was all very confusing.
"Where am I?"
I muttered to myself. My voice sounded very odd to my ears.
"Why don't I recognize my own voice?"
This was all too overwhelming. I tried to open my eyes, this time slowly, but the sun still forced me to barely squint out of one eye. Looking around as best as I could, I only saw trees and the top half of what appeared to be a horse carriage. This was even more confusing as I was certain that I lived in the city, right? I shook my head slightly, like a rehearsed reaction trying to clear the fuzz from my head, but it didn't help. I finally decided to just relax a bit longer, trying to remember where I was and what I was doing here, wherever here was. Almost absently, I started moving my hands around the grass when my fingers brushed along something hard. I gently laid my fingers on it, uncertain of what it was. It was almost round and felt very smooth. After a moment or two, I decided it felt like lacquered wood, so I settled my hand more firmly onto it. Immediately, I could almost sense that it was a handle, so I took it in hand. As I did, I felt more of the haze start to clear, but I still could not remember where I was or what had happened. I let the wood drop from my grip and just relaxed to allow myself more time to recover. I laid there for a while longer until I was able to finally open my eyes all the way. Now I could see the beautiful blue sky, the treetops swaying in the wind, and the sun was starting to slip away. Closing my eyes again, I slowly sat up, quickly dropping my head and tucking it into my chest as the wound on my head exploded in pain, but quickly faded to the sharp throbbing I was becoming accustomed to. I sat there for a bit before trying to move or even open my eyes as I was afraid I would pass out from the pain. I eventually, ever so slowly, lifted my head and slowly opened my eyes. At first, I wasn't sure what I was looking at. I saw these pools of thick, dark red ooze all over. Something inside me seemed excited, but I also knew this wasn't right. As I continued to look around, I started to become terrified as the realization of what I was seeing was starting to sink in. I had been laying on a road that appeared to be slightly overgrown, which suggested that it wasn't used often. I found this to be odd. I could not hear or see any other people except those that were littered in front of me, at least the parts of them that I could see. I saw what appeared to be body parts strewn all over the road, some in the wagon, some even nearby me. I knew now that the pools of red ooze were blood. There was so much blood. I could see bloody hands, feet, legs. There were bones that I could not recall the names of, clumps of scalp, heads with no bodies, and at least one torso with no limbs. I was shocked.
"What happened here?"
The question barely escaped my lips. My heart started to beat faster and harder the more I looked. The haze fully lifted now as I looked at this horrid scene before me. I could not understand what I was doing in a place like this, with so much savagery. I felt a tear slip from my eye as I continued to survey the area. I slowly got to my feet and started to walk around trying to take it all in. I still wasn't sure what I was doing here or what had happened to me, but I was coming to an odd peace at this horror I was seeing. In fact, I was starting to feel excited, I guess. I suppose my excitement was coming from a need to flee, to get to safety. No, that didn't feel right. Maybe I'm worried that whatever did this might return and try to finish me off? No, that wasn't sitting right either. Honestly, the excitement was confusing me. It almost felt like I am excited about what I'm seeing, but any normal human being would be horrified at this sight, disturbed, disgusted even. I started to agonize over why this sight wasn't bothering me more, but also feared the reality of understanding why. So I pushed those thoughts to the side and my gaze was drawn back to where I had been laying. There, on the ground next to where I had been, was the smooth lacquered handle, which I could see now was an axe. The metal head was coated in dried blood and hair. My hand absently moved to my head, delicately touching my scalp again. I finally understood what had given me the wound. I slowly made my way to where the axe was still laying on the ground. I had hoped that feeling the handle in my hands would spark some memories of the event that led me here. I carefully bent down to pick it up. I took the axe by the handle. I held it, turned it over in my hands, looked it over, but no memory surfaced. However, deep inside, I felt a small twinge that slowly turned into elation. Again, more feelings that confused me.
Damn it.
I let out a heavy sigh and dropped the axe to the ground. I was about to sit down but noticed some blood splatters that seemed to be different than the rest. The blood that was all around had been in pools or smears, but this blood appeared to be large droplets, and a lot of them. A few inches away, I saw more of the same. A little bit further, even more. I realized that these drops were in a straight line that headed into the woods. As I started to follow the trail of blood, a bright gleam caught my eye. I looked at the source and could barely make out the tip of a shiny object. I started to walk towards it when a sudden dizzy spell caused me to lose my balance and fall face first into the ground. The sudden jar caused the pain in my head to explode again and I let out a yelp.
Oh.
I laid there for a moment, but curiosity got the better of me and decided to crawl to the shiny object that I had seen. As I inched closer, I was starting to see what appeared to be a gun, which didn't make sense as I didn't know anyone with a gun. Actually, come to think of it, I don't remember anyone. This threatened to overtake my senses, but again I pushed the screaming voice in my head down and crawled on. Once I made it, I sat up slowly, sitting on my backside, and stared at the gun for a bit. I got back to my feet, again slowly, but before standing all the way up, I plucked the gun from the ground. Once fully erect, I could see that the grip had inscribed initials.
J.A.
I muttered.
Who is J.A.?
I looked around.
And what the fuck happened here?
I said quietly, frustration starting to set in. I looked back to the blood trail once again. Without conscious thought, my hand moved to my side, pulled back my long black coat, and slid the gun into a holster. I looked down, astonished. How the hell had I not realized it had been there the whole time?
Fuck me,
I said in amazement. My head swam, in part due to not understanding what had happened, but also now certain that the bash on my head had done some real damage. I was beginning to feel queasy and faint, so I figured I would rest a bit before seeing how far I could follow the blood trail. I moved to a shaded area and eased myself down to the ground, resting my back on a large oak tree. I leaned my head forward and rested my chin on my chest. Something told me that because of my head injury, I should not allow myself to sleep, so I was determined to stay awake. I looked up at the sun and figured I still had a couple hours before the sun would set. To occupy myself, I tried to piece together what the hell had happened. There were so many questions and so very few answers. As I started to think about the situation, I pulled the gun from the holster to look at the initials again.
Who the hell is J.A.?
I mumbled to myself. That's when it hit me.
Who the fuck am I?
I exclaimed loudly. I tried hard to remember who I was, where I grew up, how I came to be in this place, but there was nothing. It was as if I were a blank slate, only just waking from a coma. This thought sent my mind to 1,000 directions, and I let out an involuntary whimper. Another heavy sigh escaped and was about to place the gun on the ground in front of me when I noticed that there appeared to be one spent round. It was a revolver, so I could easily see that there were 5 remaining unfired bullets. To keep my mind from losing itself, I thought about what I had seen and what I could put together.
Okay, so I could potentially be J.A., who carries a gun, and apparently I was required to fire a single shot. I appear to have been bashed on the head with an axe, but for what reason, I don't know.
The next question came as a shock.
Did I kill that person? Or those people?
I asked myself quietly. That actually made my stomach a bit more queasy at that thought, so I did take a bit of comfort in that fact.
If I murdered them, did I also
The words were hard to say.
hack them to pieces?
Deep inside me, something screamed no, but at this point, I could not be sure. I had become so focused on these questions, I did not hear the approaching roar of horses' hooves beating the ground. My eyes became fixated on the trail of blood once again, and I started to rise and was going to follow the blood trail into the woods.
Maybe this is the blood of the person I shot.
Thinking to myself, I took the first step towards the woods, and I heard someone shout,
"Over here! I found him!"
The voice sounded like they were a good 50 feet away, so I didn't think they were talking about me, but I took no chances. Almost like an instinct took over. As quickly as I could, I moved into the tree line. There, I had lowered myself back down, my chest against the exact tree I had been leaning on, but now hidden on the opposite side of where the voice had come from. I laid there for what felt like an eternity, was about to move away from the tree when I saw the first flash of blue coming through the woods just on the other side of the road. I held my breath, in fear that even my breathing could alert whoever these people were. I laid against the tree, motionless as possible, and finally I saw them walk through the tree line. At first it was only a couple, then moments later a flood of blue coats followed. There must have been 20 of them. Even from this distance I could make out that they each had a shield on their chest. They were the police. I felt excited at first until I saw the reactions to the scene in front of them. Some of them could not hold their gag reflex and threw up where they stood. Others tried hard to hold back, but found themselves running a short distance before vomiting. Eventually, they were able to regain control of themselves and started walking over the scene. A few heads would pop up from time to time to search the tree line, but not seeing anything would return to their investigation. After a few minutes, the same person called out,
"Did you find him?"
These words rang in my head, as I was certain that when I had first heard them, they yelled,
"Over here! I found him!"
Did I not hear them right? I couldn't be sure. Knowing that they were still looking for someone and seeing their reaction to the scene made me realize that if I had been the one that had done this, I would not be a welcome guest coming into their midst, especially right now. After a few more moments of watching and making sure that no one had been looking in my direction, I slowly pulled away from the tree and started to rise. When I had laid against the tree, I had not noticed the low-hanging branch, and so when I stood up, it brushed against the bash on my head. The touch caused me to yell out in pain, which immediately alerted the police. After a moment, I finally got myself under control and turned around and started to run as fast as I could. The pain in my head once again made me dizzy, and I knew that I wasn't moving near quick enough to evade my pursuers. I was about to take another step when my vision became blurry for a split second, and just before darkness took me, I heard the same voice yell,
"Detective!"
I woke up to a policeman on each side of me. Immediately my heart began to pound, my mouth went dry, and my blood ran cold. As I forced myself to calm down, I realized I was now in a bed, but my arms were bound to the bedside. I struggled against the restraints momentarily when I realized the effort caused too much pressure on my head, which threatened to cause me to black out again. Hearing the restraints, both policemen looked at me. I expected to see hatred and resentment there, but the looks were of relief. One of the officers walked away, and I heard him say,
"Detective, he's awake."
I recognized the voice as the same one from the woods. After a few moments, a woman walked in the room and looked at me hard, and then, with a slight twitch of her head, the officers left the room. She looked back at me with a more sympathetic look this time. The detective moved forward, stood close to the bed, and then bent over.
"You don't know who I am, do you?"
She asked softly. I shook my head no. After staring for a moment longer, she stood up.
"We were all too late in finding the killing grounds. We found the remains of 5 individuals, 2 adults and 3 children.
She shook her head in a way that looked a bit more like shame.
We have identified them all, and they were the same family. The brutal bastard started to remove their limbs while they were still alive. The sick fuck.
She became visibly upset at this point.
They were moving to a new city, a new life, a new chapter, and we could not protect them.
The anger was seething from her now. She looked at me hard.
Do you know whose fault that is?
I made no effort to answer. What she had just said made me sad beyond reason. I could not understand what kind of monster would kill children in such a brutal and disgusting way. I started to weep silently.
The motherfucker you have been tracking for 3 years, Detective Adler?
She let out a heavy sigh.
You got that son of a bitch, though, John.
Who? John? I don't understand.
I said helplessly.
As best as we can tell, you finally caught up to him. There was a fight, and he hit you with that fucking axe.
She started to raise her voice, but paused a moment to collect herself before going on.
Before you fell unconscious, you were able to get one clean shot to his stomach, right through that asshole's liver. He only made it about 20 feet into the woods from where you were.
So, I didn't kill those people?
I asked, pleading.
No, John, there's no telling how many lives you might have saved.
Thank you to everyone that stopped in this evening. Remember to check out Furberries, Creepy Clown Girl, and Wrath of Blades and show them some love. But until next time, remember, just because you couldn't see it, doesn't mean it wasn't watching you.